theosis, our union with God, which is our destiny, is also happening now. So the eschaton and this notion of theosis come together to revive and remake, in a way, the importance of the present.
He says it quite clearly. I don't think it can be misunderstood, really. The good news is that the kingdom has come. Or the good news is that the kingdom has drawn near, or that it has come upon us. So change your hearts, change your minds, make this 180-degree turn in the way you relate to the world, in the way you relate to your fellow brothers and sisters, and realize that it is here. But what is here? What is it that is here? Of course, you can't put that into conceptual language, but his words is like an invitation. It's like an energetic transmission of like inviting it and pointing to. In some sense, it's like the finger pointing at the moon, in the Zen tradition. It's like, don't get stuck on the finger. Look where I'm pointing. And so he's suggesting to people and inviting people into, it's right here. That must be the good news. It can't be God's drama of redemption and Heilsgeschichte, salvation history and all of this, and then you will get to the kingdom. No, you are all invited into the eternal now, into this now that is the now of all times. And within this now, hidden within this now, is, this homecoming that is always here, has always been here, and will always be here.
And then in Luke, particularly, there's this, quite well-known session where Jesus says, people will say the kingdom's over there, it's kind of coming towards us. And he says, no, the kingdom of God is within you. So this sort of stress on interiority, and that's the place to look. But of course, you also get plenty of examples in the New Testament of a future eschatology. There's, apocalyptic sections in Matthew's Gospel. In early Paul, particularly in 1 Thessalonians, is this notion that at some point we'll join those who have died in a kind of gathering in the clouds. And there's this tension, therefore, in the New Testament. And the way that I came to understand it, largely through Barfield, is that the announcement that Jesus made is remembered because the traditions remembered Christ saying it. But wrestling with what was meant was then the undertaking of, well, first of all, the gospel writers, Paul in his letters, but then, the Christian tradition itself. And in some ways we're still engaged in that about turn, that metanoia that you mentioned, to try and get a grasp, a vision of the good news. And it's in this more contemplative or mystical interior sorts of traditions that I think the true message sort of stays alive. But maybe also that's a slightly Western perspective, because, in the East there is this notion of theosis, a notion that's not really present in Western Christianity. And so there is maybe in the East more of a tradition that has lived with the sense that the kingdom of God is here. There's this lovely expression which you use from Douglas Christie of practicing paradise as a way of thinking about it as well.
Yes, because there is the emphasis on praxis, on practice. He suggests that this was what the early monastic tradition of Egypt and Palestine and Syria were actually engaged in some sense. And as you say, they were perhaps in some sense sheltering this seed of theosis, or seed of, the kingdom within. This has to be lived. This has to be practiced. This has to be realized through a kind of comprehensive reorientation of our consciousness. That's how I would frame it, perhaps. In the monastic tradition, it becomes clear that, yes, Christ is always inviting us into the now of the realized kingdom, yet there is an element of practice that is required there, because our kind of fallen tendency of the mind is to be anywhere else. Oftentimes, there is this habitual tendency to not dwell in the now, in a certain sense, and then therein discover this freshness, this innocence that Christ is pointing to.
The real goal is to see, in a way, through the surface appearance into the essence of all things, so that, well, actually the phrase that I always come back to is more of a Sufi phrase, but I think it still works, which is seeing that everywhere is the face of God. Maybe I should just quote a little bit of Maximus the Confessor. The kingdom of God the Father is present in all believers in potentiality. It is present in actuality, in those who are able to say, I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. Quoting Paul there at the end. A kind of deeper dying, you might say, that then enables the true source and fount of all this life to be appreciated. To see the world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. And I love that because it's a both and approach. There is the horizontal, there is the grain of sand, there is the flower, there is the palm of your hand, there is time. And yet, by contemplating all those wonderful things aright, you see the vertical presence too. So you see the world in the grain of sand, you see heaven in the wild flower, and so on. And I feel that's an important stress, because it's not discarding the one for the other. As Blake would say, it's the minute particulars that are absolutely fundamental and crucial here, because they are the portals to this wider perception.
The fullness, the ontological fullness, you could say, of what is really here.